Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we are talking chapter 3. We're going to be talking about a little bit of money. Money. All right. So buckle in, strap in, and get those pencils and pens ready to take those notes. These notes. All right. Let's share. And hold on. Nope, that's not it. I'm sharing the whole desktop. Oh man, there we go. Okay, hold on. Yeah, on my computer, if the web browser isn't open, then it won't share. So it's got to be opened, not in the doc. Anywho, big business and unions. Here we go. Chapter 3, lesson 2. We're chugging right along. That was your warm up. Here are the objectives. You'll be able to describe the rise of big business and the impact of the free enterprise system on industrialization. It had a very big impact. And explain the role of unions in the late 1880s. We're going to talk a lot about unions too. So before we should talk about big business, let's talk about corporations. Okay, corporations are organizations owned by many people, but treated by the law as if it were a single owner. People who own corporations are called stockholders because they own shares of ownership called stock. Issuing stock allows a corporation to raise large amounts of money for big projects while spreading out the financial risk. So those entrepreneurs risking their capital, now you got a lot of entrepreneurs, stockholders. So by the beginnings of the 1830s, states were actually passing general incorporation laws and issued stock without charters from before. With money raised by the sale of stock, these corporations can invest in technology, hire a large workforce, and purchase many machines. So if you think of today's corporations, you got Microsoft, Pepsi, I don't know this one, Netflix, this is Cisco, Apple, Walmart, Tesla, Facebook, McDonald's, just to name a few. Or is that Walmart? Did I say that was Walmart? That's Walmart, right? So advantageous. So of course, corporations are going to have several advantages. Corporations efficiently move raw materials for production and achieve economies of scale. What are economies of scale? Well, it's when the cost of manufacturing is decreased by producing goods quickly in large quantities. So this time period following the Civil War, boom, large quantities. Corporations had several advantages. They could produce more at a lower cost, making it more affordable. They stayed open during bad economic times by cutting prices to increase sales. And they were given rebates by railroads to further lower operating costs. So if you need to ship stuff across country to a more populated area that wants your stuff where your demand is high, well, rebates. So we'll give you this much off if you use our trains, basically is how it's saying. So the major costs of laissez-faire economics, however, small businesses owned by families, family-owned businesses, could not keep up with large corporations, and many were forced out of business. That still happens today. Consolidation. So consumers loved laissez-faire economics because competition led to falling prices. However, business leaders did not like competition. Cutting prices to beat the competition meant cutting into their profits. But with no governmental regulation about how businesses compete, companies were free to make deals and fix prices by organizing pools. Pools are agreements to keep prices at a certain level. American courts and legislatures were suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. All right. Of pools because they interfered with competition and property rights. that's what competition, that's why capitalism works so well, is anyone can create a good or service, and competition is healthy. Although companies could legally fix prices, they found out that they had no legal protection and couldn't enforce their pool agreements in court. So pools will break apart whenever one member cut prices to steal market share from another. It's all about that money. All right, so titans of industry, ... So I've led up to this many times in our lectures. So titans of industry, or are they robber barons, you know? So one such example is Andrew Carnegie, whichever one. He was a Scottish-born immigrant. He worked as a bobbin boy in a textile factory and worked all the way up to the superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad in Pittsburgh, PA. He will buy shares in iron mills, factories that made sleeping cars and railroad locomotives, as well as a company that made railroad bridges. He will then meet Sir Henry Bessemer, who invented a process of making high-quality steel efficiently and cheaply called, you guessed it, the Bessemer process. After meeting Bessemer, he opened up his own steel mill in Pittsburgh in 1875 and used the Bessemer process. And to make his company more efficient, he began the vertical integration of the entire steel industry. Now, this is a test question. Mark it down, bet your bottom dollar. A vertically owned company, vertically integrated owned company, owns all of the different businesses it depends on for its operations. So instead of paying different companies for coal, steel, lime, Carnegie straight up bought the coal mines, the limestone quarries, and the iron ore fields. And vertical integration saved money and enabled businesses to definitely grow. Hello, that's Andrew Carnegie. Or robber barons. Okay. Business leaders will also push for horizontal integration. Test question. Which is the combination of many firms in the same industry, all in one large corporation. So this will frequently happen as one business began to lose its market share. They would sell themselves to competitors to create a larger organization. And one such example, you got Andrew Carnegie, Carnegie Steel. You got 1880. There's going to be a series of buyouts called by Standard Oil, owned by John D. Rockefeller and others. John D. Rockefeller just gets most attributed with it, to gain control of 90% of the oil refining industry in the United States. Yes, we made our own oil back in the day. 90%. That's called a monopoly. And that's okay. That's basically all these different companies made into one large company, and he bought them all. So yes, like I said, when a company achieves this much control, it's called a monopoly. That's John D. Rockefeller. That's a political cartoon of Standard Oil, the Standard Oil octopus. And they got their hands in the Capitol building, Congress, congressmen, the White House. I mean, everyone's in their pocket. Hey, then there's Monopoly. I don't know if Monopoly is made after him, but there's someone else that you might need to know. So, for example, for those test questions, I'm going to ask you to explain the differences between the two, vertical integration, horizontal integration. And then I want you to give me an example of who or what company is an example of horizontal or vertical integration. So monopolies are bad. Basically, Americans feared monopolies because they believed a monopoly could charge whatever it wanted for its products. And they're right. One cost of laissez-faire economics was that it would allow for the creation of a large, powerful corporations that could control precise prices. That's prices. and manipulate politicians and laws to ensure that they did not face any new competition. They kept competition zero. Supporters of laissez-faire economics disagreed. They asserted that monopolies had to keep their prices low because high prices could allow competitors to reappear and offer products at a lower price. So it's like a cat and mouse game, but you should know monopolies aren't good, especially today's economy. So trusts began. By the late 1800s, people's suspicions, don't be suspicions, about monopolies were becoming more and more rampant. States started making it illegal for one company to own stock in another company. However, these people will form trusts, which kind of avoid this whole law stuff. Anyways, what is a trust? Test question. A trust is a legal concept that allows one person to manage another person's property. The person who manages the property is called a trustee. So stockholders give their stocks to a group of trustees who award them with shares of the trust and a portion of the trust's profits. Trustees manage the stock but did not own it and could control a group of companies as if they were one large merged company. In response to anti-monopoly legislation, for example, 1882 Standard Oil actually formed the first trust in America. Again, it's a new way for businesses to merge that did not violate the laws against owning other companies. Again, another way around it. Hello? So here's a political cartoon of trusts. Trusts usually, I don't know if you talked about it last year in world history, but anytime someone is depicted as fat in political cartoons, being fat in history meant that you were wealthy. It was a sign of wealth. You could eat whenever you wanted to. You had enough money to do whatever you want and eat whatever you want. So therefore, trusts in this time period are politically cartooned as fat people. The Steel Beam Trust, the Copper Trust, the Standard Oil Trust, the Iron Trust, the Sugar Trust, the Tin Trust, the Coal Trust, the Paper Bag Trust. All right, and it says this is the Senate. If the monopolist by the of the monopolist, by the monopolist, for the monopolist. And this is hark back to by the people, for the people, and to the people, for the people, by the people, to the people. So invest. In 1889, the state of New Jersey further escalated the role of big business, thank you, New Jersey, with a new incorporation law. This law allowed corporations set up in New Jersey to own stock in other businesses. Many companies will use this law to create holding companies. So more background, gentlemen's agreements, shady stuff. So a holding company does not produce anything as a company. It owns the stock of companies that do produce goods, effectively merging them into one large enterprise. And people that do this, investment bankers, specialize in helping companies issue stock. Companies will sell large blocks of stock to investment bankers at a discount. The bankers then find investors and sell the stock for a profit. One of the most famous investment bankers, J.P. Morgan. So he is going to try several times to buy Carnegie Steel for a while, and he will unsuccessfully be unsuccessful in doing so. That was a sentence. So Morgan will straight up buy out Andrew Carnegie in 1901, and he will rename the company U.S. Steel. And within a few short years, U.S. Steel will become the America's first billion-dollar business. And when you make a lot of money, risking your money, getting more money, then you can do stuff like this. So, not to say that J.P. Morgan was wrong in doing so, or Andrew Carnegie, But, these guys were just all about making a profit. That's JP Morgan. And I would argue that guy looks like that guy. Just saying, that's JP Morgan. All right, sell the product. So there's going to be a vast array of products being sold, which will lead to retailers looking for new ways to clickbait, attract consumers. You have N.W. Ayer and Son, the first advertising company, pioneered the use of large illustrated ads, and by 1900, retailers were now spending over $90 million a year on advertising in newspapers and magazines. Advertising attracted readers to the newest retail business, the department store. In 1877, advertisements billed John Wanamaker's new Philadelphia department store, the Grand Depot, as the largest space in the world devoted to retail selling on a single floor. Soon, many department stores offered a huge selection of products. Chain stores, a group of retail outlets owned by the same company, first appeared in the mid-1800s. Chain stores like Woolworths will focus on offering low prices for people to buy. Again, if you keep prices low, people can't afford it. It is how it works. To reach the millions of people who lived in rural areas, retailers began issuing mail order catalogs. And two of the largest mail order retailers were Montgomery Ward and Sears, Roebuck and Co., or shortened to just Sears. And these two companies were around back in my day as a little kid. You'd either go to Ward's or Sears on a Sunday at the mall in Modesto. So, fun times. Ask your parents, did they ever go to Montgomery Ward or Sears? They'll let you know. They had everything. Their huge catalogs were widely distributed through the mail, and they used attractive illustrations and appealing descriptions to advertise to thousands of items they had for sale. Maybe I should ask them for thumbnail help. So here you got Woolworths over here, Sears, store closing. If you know anything, Sears isn't around, and neither is Montgomery Ward. Sad day. So work be like. Benefits of laissez-faire economics were the rapid industrialization, the dramatic innovation, and the improvement of the standard of living. But the idea that governments should regulate the economy had costs. And one such one was working conditions. Workers performed dull, repetitive tasks in dangerous, unhealthy working conditions. They breathed in lint, dust, and toxic fumes. Heavy machines lacked safety devices, which caused injuries. So with no workplace or safety training regulations, workers had no recourse that when they were treated poorly other than to quit or look for a new job, which they probably couldn't afford, because if you didn't show up to work because of an injury, you were probably fired. If you didn't show up because you were sick, fired. So trying to find a job, tough times, especially in the late 1880s, 1873, there's a panic. 1880, 1882, there's a panic. Panics, depressions, not good for finding a job, okay? Only a few entrepreneurs will become rich. Wages earned by workers rose 50% between, 50% more between 1860 and 1890, but there's an uneven distribution of wealth between the working class and the wealthy, creating a resentment among the workers. So your book says, on average, industrial workers made 22 cents an hour and worked 59 hours a week. That's $12.98 a week. So, I did some quick maths, a Google search, and that was about $458 a week is how much an industrial worker made in today's money. So not that much. It might be for us, high school kids, $400 a week. Ooh, yeah. But for these guys, that was their living. Oh, that was pictures of factories, if you didn't know. Deflated. Between 1865 and 1897, deflation, test question, probably going to be on your midterm. Inflation, deflation. Deflation will cause prices to fall, which actually increases the buying power of workers' wages. Although companies will regularly cut wages in the 1800s, prices will fall even faster so that wages were actually still going up in buying power. However, workers still knew that they were getting less money and they resented that. And due to this, many workers decided there needed to be unions to improve working conditions. And within the union, they could bargain and negotiate for higher wages. And here's a what do you call it? Graphic organizer of deflation. Lower prices for goods and services. There's a smaller cash flow and profits for companies. A reduction in production leads to layoffs, no new hiring, which leads to increased unemployment, which leads to less spending on goods and services, which means an oversupply of goods and services, and boom, it's just a spiral. I'm locked up. So employers will have to negotiate with trade unions only because these unions represented workers with skills the employer needed. Employers generally viewed unions as conspiracies that they interfered with property rights. Business leaders were particularly opposed to industrial unions with who united all the workers in a particular industry. And the workers who tried to organize unions will face several problems. Companies required workers to take oaths or sign contracts promising not to join a union. They will hire detectives to identify union organizers, and workers who tried to organize a union or even put on a strike were eventually put on a blacklist, a list of troublemakers, so that no company would even hire them. So companies will use, it's supposed to be also use lockouts to break up existing unions. They would straight up lock them out from the property and will refuse to pay them. Probably not a good thing. If you've heard the term lockout, you probably heard it in the way of in sports, there are NFL player lockouts, NBA player lockouts, all fighting for better wages, better conditions, better safety, especially, football with concussion protocol, same thing in basketball, protecting the health of the player, right? I know that's a little stretch, but those are lockouts in today's terms. So business leaders, if a union called a strike, employers would hire replacements or strike breakers. No unions, no peace. So there were actually no laws stated that workers had the right to organize unions or require owners to negotiate with them. So instead of staying out of economic disputes and allowing workers to confront owners and to work out their disagreements on their own, the government actually implemented policies that supported business owners and impeded the development of unions. So the government and the courts will, in this time period, side with the employers, not the employees. A little bit of, bias, stuff like that. Because if someone went on strike during this time, you wouldn't receive goods, or workers won't get paid. There'd be a stop in the economy. And that's why probably they sided with the employers, because they knew the employer had nothing to do with it. It was the employees that wanted these rights. So courts frequently ruled that strikes were conspiracies in restraint of trade, and labor leaders were often fined or jailed. Eventually, state militia and federal troops will be used to break up strikes. Not a good look for them unions. Un-American. So unions suffered because there was a perception that they were un-American and they threatened American institutions of democracy and free enterprise. And the ideas of German economist Karl Marx, called Marxism, was very influential in Europe during this time period. Marx argued, hopefully you remember this from last year, Marx argued that the basic force for shaping capitalist society was a struggle between the workers and the owners. And they believed the workers would eventually revolt, seize control of the factories, and overthrow the government. Ultimately, the state would dissolve and leave a communist society behind where classes did not exist. While many labor supporters agreed with Marx, few supported anarchism, and that tended to go along with Marxism. Anarchists in Europe will assassinate government officials and set off bombs in an attempt to start a revolution. During this time, too, thousands of European immigrants came to America, and as we know, there was a strong anti-immigrant sentiment towards American immigration. And Americans will assume and associate immigrant workers and unions with radical ideas, and they did not want that in their country. Oh, if he's part of the union, oh, if he's an immigrant, he's part of radical ideas, I don't want him in my country. Get him out. And that's obviously that's a bad way to think nowadays in nowadays terms, but people went for it. People sadly had those, not just a few, a lot of people had this anti-immigration sentiment. Here's Karl Marx, one of the most epic beards in history. I can't grow any. So there are a few examples of strikes, and you have the Great Railroad Strike in 1877. So there can be confrontations with owners and the government, which will lead to violence and bloodshed. One such, the Great Railroad Strike. So the Panic of 1873, there was a severe recession that forced many companies to cut wages. In the summer of 1877, although the economy still hadn't been revitalized or it didn't make its way back, it's still recovering at this time. Baltimore and Ohio railroad companies announced they were cutting wages for a third time. In West Virginia, workers will walk off the job and block tracks. As word spread, many more railroad workers across the country will walk off the job. And this strike will involve some 80,000 workers and will affect 2/3 of the nation's railways. They will smash equipment, tear up tracks, or even block services in New York City, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and Chicago. If you know anything about those cities, those are big cities. Those are big hubs of industry and trade across America, and that ain't gonna be a nice thing. President Rutherford B. Hayes, hey, it's that guy. Compromise of 1877. All of this going on, and this is Reconstruction. Think about it. This is still Reconstruction. So President Rutherford B. Hayes declared a state of insurrection and sent federal troops to West Virginia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere. It will eventually take 12 days to restore order, $10 million in railroad property damages. 100 people were dead. And this violence alarmed Americans and added that the idea of allowing workers to organize was dangerous to society. So this is a picture of the army firing on protesters, just trying to get paid. So you have the Knights of Labor, founded in 1869, took a different approach to labor issues. You have a guy named Terrence Powderly. He will oppose strikes in favor of boycotts and arbitration. What is arbitration? Well, arbitration is when a third party helps workers and employers reach an agreement. Unlike other unions, the Knights welcomed women and African Americans. They called for an 8-hour workday, equal pay for women, no child labor, and worker-owned factories. Because let's be real, the employers of all these factories probably never worked a day in their life doing these jobs. And so, if you have someone who has had experience in these jobs, they will be more understandable for workers' rights and workers' voices when they see a grievance at hand. So supporters of the 8-hour workday will call for a nationwide strike May 1st, 1886. The Chicago police actually will intervene in a fight that was happening on a picket line, and they will open up fire on the strikers, killing 4 people. This is on May 3rd. So in your book. May 3rd. So the next day, 3,000 people gathered to protest the shootings in Chicago's Haymarket Square. And historians aren't truly understandable of this whole situation, but your book goes on to say that someone in the crowd threw a bomb, the police opened fire, workers will fire back, injuring 170 people and killing 10 officers in at the end of it. 8 men would be arrested. Although evidence against them was weak in court, the public was so angry that it will result in 8 convictions. 4 would be executed. So here's an image of arbitration, and here's Shohei Ohtani. If you haven't heard him in the news, he's a very good baseball player. He pitches and he hits bombs. And he just avoided arbitration with the LA Angels, and he signed a $30 million contract for next season. He's going to make $30 million next baseball season. Crazy. Now here's the Haymarket Square riot. All right, more examples. Homestead and Pullman strikes. So the summer of 1892, Homestead steel manager Henry Clay Frick proposed cutting wages by 20%. He then will lock out employees and had the Pinkerton Detective Agency bring in replacement workers. When the Pinkertons and strikebreakers approached the plant, strikers resisted them. Over 14 hours, the Pinkertons and the strikers clashed, leaving several dead and dozens injured. The Pennsylvania governor will send in the militia to protect strikebreakers, and for 4 months later, the strike collapsed. Probably because those people ran out of money that was in their savings. Let's be honest. In 1894, the Pullman Palace Car Company slashed workers' wages without lowering rents or prices in the company town. The American Railway Union, ARU, workers refused to handle Pullman cars and railroads grounded to a near halt. Railroad managers arranged to have U.S. mail cars attached to the Pullman cars, and President Grover Cleveland will send in federal troops to keep the mail running. So as long as, because you can't stop the mail, right? That's like stopping the mail. You don't have a right to do that as a citizen. A federal court will then issue an injunction or a formal order to halt the boycott. Both the strike and the ARU will collapse, and the Supreme Court later upheld the right to issue such an injunction, and this will give big business a powerful tool for dealing with labor unrest whenever it happens. They got the courts on their side. It wasn't all bad, right? Although unions failed early on, they were still popping up all over the country. 20 of the nation's most prosperous trade unions organized the American Federation of Labor, AFL, in 1886. Their first leader was, great name, Samuel Gompers. And Gompers believed unions should stay out of politics. He was willing to strike, but preferred to negotiate. And the AFL had 3 main goals. Try to convince companies to recognize unions and allow and agree to collective bargaining. They want to push for closed shops, which were companies hiring only union members. And of course, the 8-hour workday. That's the Chicago Federation of Labor, affiliated with the AFO of L. And here's Samuel Gompers. The Wobblies, another union. So in 1905, a group of labor radicals, many of them socialists, created the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW. The IWW wanted to organize all workers into one big union according to industry without making distinctions between skilled and unskilled workers. In 1912, the IWW led a successful strike of 25,000 textile workers in Lawrence, Massachusetts, protesting wage cuts. The company, however, will reverse the cuts 10 weeks later. It was their biggest win as a union, but their union will never gain a large membership, mainly because its radical philosophy will lead many people to condemn the Wobblies. They were nicknamed the Wobblies, and they They weren't that popular. Not that popular. That's the IWW. Women. Hey, women. We get to talk about you. It's only on the last page of the section, but hey. After the Civil War, the number of women wage earners began to increase across America. By 1900, women made up more than 18% of the labor force. 1/3 were domestic servants. Another third worked as teachers, nurses, sales clerks, and office clerical workers. The remaining third worked as industrial workers, often in the garment industry, textiles, and food processing plants. Women would be paid less than men, even though they performed the same tasks. Assumptions were made that a woman only had a man helping to support her, while a man needed higher wages in order to support a family. And most unions, sadly, will exclude women. But it's not all bad. One of the most famous labor leaders of the era, Mary Harris Jones. She was nicknamed Mother Jones. And she was a labor organizer for the AFL and mine workers. She was a very successful speaker and her strikes, her protests were very successful because of the way she was a great orator. She could talk good. Not me. And Rockefeller will dub her the most dangerous woman in America because she actually has a voice. And that's a picture of her, all pixelated. All right, okay, that concludes today's lecture. I know it was a little bit longer than the previous ones. Hold on. I'm looking up your work because, I never have it in front of me. All right, sorry about that. Coming into focus. So your homework is to do page 146, 2 through 4. All right, page 146, 2 through 4. I know it was a little bit longer. This section was a little bit longer, but we had to talk about these, and big business often goes with workers' unions. Yin and yang. So hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, helps boy out. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe, wash your hands. Peace.